Fabulous. So what I'm going to do is just share my screen. I've got a presentation for us today to take you through. Hopefully it's not too dry. I've tried to make it as interesting as possible. So what I'll do is I'll share my screen for that. So whilst I'm sharing my screen, I find it hard to kind of juggle questions at the same time. So what I'll ask is if you've got questions along the way, if you can either put them in the Q&A, if you've got that function, or if not, in the chat is absolutely fine. And then when we come to the end of the presentation, I'll answer all the questions. But I know what it's like if you don't write it there and then sometimes you can forget. So feel free to pop it in as we go along. So I'm just going to share my screen a second. Okay. So there we go. So can everyone see that one, Nick? Brilliant. Fabulous. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Bethany Allen. I am the Skills Hub manager. I joined the Skills Hub in January, so still fairly new to the role, but have been in the skills landscape for over a decade, scarily enough. So today we're going to talk about apprenticeships and how they can benefit your business, and also just get to grips with the basics of them, because it can be quite confusing. So I'm just going to dive straight in, if that's right with everybody. So firstly, just to do a little bit of background, what is the Skills Hub? So obviously myself and Nick are from the Skills Hub. We are part of a wider team. So the Skills Hub, we are independent and impartial skills experts. So we offer advice to businesses to help them navigate workforce development and all the different types of offers and support that's available. All right, so as you can see, what do? We help businesses work smarter. As we know, skills and training are a massive part of the development of your business and making sure you're prepared for the future. In Cornwall, there is a skills deficit at the moment. We suffer with an ageing workforce, among other things, as well as a lack of kind of leadership and management skills in the county in general. So we're here to try and help tackle that through advice and guidance, and also look to embed a culture of kind of skills and staff development within businesses, because sometimes it isn't always in the kind of day-to-day running of a business, which is completely understandable because we're all trying to do, you know, the daily role. Just to give you a bit of background about who we are and how we're funded, we're actually funded by European Social Fund contracts, that's EU money, and we're part funded then with Cornwall Council and the LEP. We are also part of the Growth Hub, so we work alongside the Growth Hub very closely. So we have a lot of shared assets. So for example, our website is the Cornwall and Ardersilly Growth and Skills Hub, and some of our team work alongside both projects. So it's really good because it means we get a good overview. So let's get straight into the nitty gritty. So firstly, what is an apprenticeship? Yeah, so it's defined in government policy, the term apprenticeship in England, Scotland and Wales. In other countries, they have apprenticeships, but they may not look the same as British apprenticeships. So in Britain, it's got a very serious definition and we have to abide by that. So apprenticeships enable employers to provide a real job. So that's the first key bit, where experience is gained and the individual is paid. So those are your kind of basics. From an eligibility point of view, individuals have to be over the age of 16, so they have to be post-school leave, but there's no upper age limit. And really it's there to improve people's skills and help them progress in their career. So firstly, I know that Nick popped in the chat about there being some polls today. So what I just wanted to get to grips with is just your experience of apprenticeships, just so that I can get a feel for kind of how everyone has experienced them or not in the past. So Nick, if we could have the first poll up on the screen, that would be great.
Apologies, Bethany, it's just frozen on me.
No worries. So my first poll question, just to give you a prior warning, is going to be how many of you guys in your business have undertaken training that can be statutory, mandatory or otherwise in the last year. So this is general training across the whole organisation. So how many of businesses that are here today have undertaken training? So that could be a staff or it could be you guys. So if you could just click on the poll and it will live update, which is always good, just so that we can get a feel for training in general. Because I know, for example, people have had people on furlough, so therefore some people have been able to take up training within the workplace during furlough, but other businesses I think have been running flat out, for example care sector, so they may not have had time to be able to do any training. So just going to let that go for 2 more seconds. Cool. Fabulous. Well, that's really good. 67% have done statutory or general training. That's brilliant. And 33% have said no. So yeah, that's kind of what I was expecting, to be honest. It's been an interesting year, so it's quite nice just to get a feel for that. So we're just going to do 3 quick questions. So the second one here, which Nick will flash up on your screen, is the question about apprenticeships. So have you or your business taken on apprentices previously? Cool, so I think we're going to see a majority of no, very slightly. Fab, yeah. Actually, it's quite almost an even split, to be honest. So that's really interesting. Fabulous. And then finally, just one more poll for you and then we'll crack on. The third question, just because I thought it was interesting, is just whether you think apprenticeships are a worthy business investment as you stand right now. So, the answers are coming in thick and fast, what we like. Brilliant. So yes and unsure. So that's good. Nobody thinks they're not. We've got some to convince, but otherwise we're all good. That's fabulous. Thank you very much, Nick, for that. And thank you everyone as well for your answers. So you may have to just press the cross on the top of the poll screen, depending if your Zoom reacts or not. So firstly, I would like to dispel some myths. You may have seen me on social media recently doing some myth busting with the Cornwall Apprenticeship campaign. So firstly, let's just have a look at some of the common misconceptions around apprenticeships, just to make sure we're all on the same page. Firstly, apprenticeships are only for school leavers. This isn't true. As I just mentioned, there's no upper age limit. So it's worth considering any age participant if you are looking at apprenticeships. Apprenticeships don't lead to good qualifications. Again, not true. You can probably see the theme here. So apprenticeships can be any level from level 2, which is basically an equivalent of 5 GCSEs A to C, all the way up to a level 7, which is master's degree level. So they really do give you all kind of scope, all layers of scope for any level training within your business. So it could be bringing entry level participants into your business, but it could also be training your kind of management or leadership staff. Only new hire employees can access apprenticeships. So actually this isn't true, because you can progress somebody within your workplace onto an apprenticeship. So for example, if you had somebody working in a team currently who you wanted to make a supervisor or a manager, or maybe a team leader, you could put them onto an apprenticeship because they would be learning new skills. So as long as that person was moving into a job role where they needed new skills and training, they can go onto an apprenticeship. So it's actually a really good way to utilise that training funding. Apprentices get trained and then leave the company. So actually 90% of apprentices remain in employment, 71% stay with the same employer. An interesting little nugget I picked up as well was that actually 23% of apprenticeship achievers within 12 months of achieving actually secured a promotion, which I thought was really nice. 23% securing a promotion. So it shows even once your apprenticeship training is finished, actually that person's still pushing and wanting to achieve. Apprentices are a drain on business resources. I hear this a lot. So actually they can increase your productivity by up to 214, an average of 214 pounds per week. Apprentices are really motivated. They're there because they want to learn, they want to gain the skills, and they want to be in your business. So yes, there will be the need to allocate them a mentor, for example, but that person is going to be really driven. So don't think of it as a drain. Think about what they're bringing to your business. Apprenticeships are expensive. I've heard this one a lot. And again, this kind of tends to come back more to the resources. So I think people are thinking about the time that they're putting into an apprentice, but actually it is at the moment one of the most cost-effective training routes. There is a minimum wage that has to be adhered to, which we'll cover later, but the training cost is heavily subsidised. So if you're a small employer, for example, the government will pay between 95 and 100% of the training costs. So yes, you're paying to employ that person, but all of that extensive training that they're getting is really heavily subsidised. Where else could you put someone on a course and get it 95 to 100% subsidised over that duration? Not many places. And then finally, apprenticeships are only available in certain sectors. So I often hear people saying that it's for certain vocational industries. So obviously, historically, apprenticeships have been really successful in areas such as construction, or apprenticeships in hairdressing or carpentry, kind of all different mechanics, I think, as well. And those are the ones people tend to think about, but actually there's such a breadth of apprenticeships now available, and they can cover all sectors. So they can be anything from digital and marketing to management, as I mentioned earlier, and they really do have a huge scope, even aerospace. So it's really worth kind of having a look at all the different ones available and saying, oh, actually, you know, that would fit our business maybe. I just wanted to flash this one up. If you've been on one of my previous presentations, you will have seen this stat before, but I think it's really key. We have got a skills gap in Cornwall, and 77%, as you can see here, of businesses in Cornwall reported having difficulty filling vacancies and finding the right skills locally. Apprenticeships can actually help us to alleviate these gaps, both by bringing new talent into the business, but also by maybe, as I mentioned earlier, upskilling a member of staff you already have in the business that has an aptitude for a certain area you need. So it's really worth considering apprenticeships when you are struggling to find those specific skills that you want. You can train that person to have the skills exactly as you want them and mould them to the way your company works. So we've covered the myths of apprenticeships. So I'd just like to cover some of the benefits as well. All right. So apprenticeships can boost your business. So I know that was in our tagline today. So let's have a look at some of the ways that apprenticeships can boost your business. So here, they're cost effective. So I mentioned earlier about the amount of subsidies that you can access for the training of your apprentices. As I said, SMEs, 95 to 100% of that training cost is covered. If you look at the training costs, they can be like 20 grand's worth of training you're getting for 100% or 95% subsidy. Just incredible amounts of investment into your business, really. Apprentices also bring new ideas and fresh perspectives. So I think we all kind of benefit from when we hire somebody new, that fresh blood, if you like, but they're also going to have an external support along their journey, which is going to help them bounce ideas and bring new ideas to the table. Long-term investment breeds loyalty. We all know that things that make people stay in their job role include the kind of feeling appreciated, feeling valued, feeling like they're being invested in. And therefore, I think if you assign somebody onto an apprenticeship, whether that be a new hire or somebody within your business that is kind of moving up through the ranks, as it were, or even learning new skills, they really appreciate that investment, and therefore they're likely to stick around with your business. They also set a good example because they're being taught the right way to do things, and they can then make sure that that is carried out within the workplace. We mentioned earlier, they can increase productivity, and it's a boost for morale and motivation as well. If somebody says to you, I'm going to invest, up to 20k of training in your career, you can see that would make somebody really keen and motivated. And welcoming those new skills to your business. I think we're all aware that the business landscape is changing very quickly. We've got a lot of digital advancement, especially since the pandemic. And it's really key to think about what skills you're going to need for the future to make sure you remain competitive. And apprenticeships are a really great way to bring those skills to your business. So apprenticeships are a key priority for the government. And with this comes a lot of noise about the subject and advertisement, and it can be really confusing to understand all of the information that's being battered around. It can feel quite overwhelming in actual fact. So what I decided to do is today, let's strip it back to the basics. So we've covered the myths, we've covered the benefits, but let's look at what an apprenticeship is. What does it mean for your business, and what does it look like in the day-to-day? Okay. So firstly, what's included in an apprenticeship? What is an apprenticeship? What does it mean? So basically, someone's going to be with you. They are a paid member of staff, and they will be learning on the job. So there will be an element where you will need to be mentoring that person and instilling some of their training yourself. Okay, so anything that you would normally do, so like induction, you'll need to still do. But all the kind of teaching somebody the day-to-day of your business, how do you do things? What's your ethos? You'll still need to do that, okay? Don't think of it as a drain, because you do that with any other member of staff. But it's important to note that you need to do that within their journey. Then there's something called off-the-job training. This is talked about a lot, and it has a percentage attached to it. So 20% of the time that they spend within working hours needs to be spent on off-the-job training. Sorry, frog in my throat. So with your off-the-job training, I think a lot of people think of that as the old way of doing things, where you had to spend a day a week at college, for example. You can still do that if you want to. You can still have an apprentice spend a day out of the workplace per week, for example, so 20%, and go away to do their training that way. But it doesn't have to be that way. So bear with me 1 second, I'm just going to have a little swill of water. That's better. So off the job, as I said, some people think that's just 20% of them out of my workforce, I'm not getting any benefit. That isn't the case. So what you can do, depending on your choice of training provider, is actually have that off-the-job training delivered in-house. So an assessor or a tutor can come to your workplace and do that training within your workplace. Off-the-job also means anything where they're learning new skills. So for example, probably the first fortnight is going to be classes off the job. Well, straight away, you're way above your 20% then average. So anytime you teach them something new, you give them feedback, they shadow somebody, that's all off the job training. So really that 20% very quickly starts reducing in the amount of time maybe outside of the workplace, or where they're literally just studying or writing assignments. So it's really important when we think about off the job training that we don't think of it as lost time. Okay, it's just the time spent learning new skills for that individual. Okay, functional skills, what on earth does that mean? So functional skills is English and maths, and it can be IT depending on the apprenticeship subject. So If your individual that you're putting on an apprenticeship already has a GCSE A to C in English and maths or an equivalent, so that, you know, any kind of equivalent key skills as they used to be, anything like that. If they've got those already, don't have to worry about it, okay? But if they come to you and they don't have English and maths qualifications, it's obviously a government priority to make sure everyone is able to achieve them. So therefore, if they come to you for your apprenticeship and they don't have an English or maths certificate, during their apprenticeship, they will study for one, okay? And that can be at whichever level that they're studying at. So it's an equivalent based on what level of apprenticeship they're doing. The aim is to get everyone to GCSE A to C equivalent, but your training provider will talk you through that. It's important to note that the 20% off the job training doesn't include functional skills, okay? So anytime they're doing English and maths is on top of that. I did just mention IT. So IT isn't required in all apprenticeships, but for example, the likelihood is if you're doing a digital apprenticeship or maybe management or business admin, you're probably going to need to do IT if you don't have an IT certificate already. Okay, so that's just making sure that they've got the right communication skills, the right numerical skills and the right IT aptitude when they come out the end of the apprenticeship. So it's to benefit you as the employer at the end of the day that they're doing that. And finally, accredited qualifications. So historically, there had to be an accredited qualification attached to every apprenticeship. We heard a lot about apprenticeship reforms in the past. I will be talking about them a little bit in a moment. But basically, when the apprenticeship reforms came in, they scrapped that and they said, do you know what? For some areas, you don't have to have an accredited qualification to be an achiever of an apprenticeship. So it's very much dependent on the subject they're undertaking. But there may be accredited qualifications included in the apprenticeship. I think most training providers try to embed one, if I'm being honest, because people like to still have a certificate. So there'll be some on-the-job training where they'll learn about, you know, from your own staff, what the day-to-day is, how your business runs, the intricacies of different jobs and tasks they need to do. There'll be the off-the-job training, which is delivered by the training provider, or kind of anything where they're learning new skills. There'll be the functional skills if they need it, so English, maths and IT. And then they'll be working towards likely an accredited qualification for the end of their apprenticeship, okay? So you're gonna have to bear with me on this slide because it's a long one, okay? These are the basics, and there's a lot of them. So a lot of it we've already covered, to be honest. So no minimum age. Sorry, no upper age limit even. No minimum age. Woo, imagine. So minimum age is 16. No upper age limit. So anyone within your organisation or new hire can be an apprentice. We can work in any sector or industry. It's no longer specific to certain industries or sectors. This is a key one. Apprenticeships must last a minimum of 372 days. Very specific, I know, but most people just refer to it as a year. So it's just over a year, okay? So you won't have an apprenticeship that's less than a year unless you have some really exceptional mitigating circumstances, but that is kind of a quality imprint of a British apprenticeship, that they're on it for a year minimum. Apprentices need to work a minimum of 30 hours per week, okay? And that includes your 20% off the job. That's really key. So make sure when you are thinking about bringing that job role into your business that you've got that kind of 30 hours there. You must pay the minimum wage. Hopefully obvious, but got to be said. Obviously in April, the minimum wage did go up slightly. So make sure you check on the .gov site, literally go on Google, type in national minimum wage, UK, the .gov site will come up, keep your eye on that. That is the best place to always be up to date, okay? So we mentioned earlier, 20% of the apprentice's time must be spent off the job training, okay? So for example, if you had an apprentice in for your 30 hours per week, 20% of the 30 hours needs to be learning new skills. That's the best way to look at it. So all apprenticeships have depending on the subject area, a price tag attached, okay? And this is called the funding band value. So for example, if you were doing customer service, it might be, say, between £3,000 and £5,000, depending on the level. If you were doing management, it might be 20. If you were doing marine engineering, I think it's about 25. Okay. And all of those prices, I will guide you to the right website for that in a moment, but it's on what's called the Institute for Apprenticeships. Okay. And I'll send this information out. I'll pop it in the chat later. But it's important to note, when you're talking to training providers about apprenticeship training, that price is the maximum, okay? It's negotiable. So if you're paying your 5% or maybe more if you're a larger business, you can negotiate that price with the training provider to make sure you feel that you're getting the right value for money for the training you're paying for, okay? And the government is paying for at the end of the day. So that's a really key one, actually. Do negotiate, because you have the power to. And as I mentioned earlier, small employers benefit from government funding towards the cost of training. Larger employers do also, but in a different way, and we're going to cover that in a moment. All right. So yeah, just going to leave that there for a second just to settle. So minimum of just over a year, 30 hours per week, 20% of their time learning new skills. Remember to negotiate your price. Okay. Apprenticeship reform. So this was huge in the news a few years ago. We had massive apprenticeship reform. So we went from things called from frameworks to standards, and there was talk of different sized businesses and different ways of delivery. And as I said earlier, there can be a lot of noise and it can be overwhelming. You can think, what on earth does this mean for me? So really, what were the key things that have changed that will impact on you now if you're taking on an apprentice, and how do they affect your business? Okay, so we're just going to look at a few of them. So the key one that changed was the Apprenticeship Journey. Okay, so historically we used to work on what were called frameworks, and that was a certain way of delivering an apprenticeship. Every apprenticeship had an accredited qualification with it, so it could be portfolio or exam based, and that was it. Okay, we then moved to standards as part of the apprenticeship reforms. The reason for that is that standards are designed by employers. Okay, so frameworks were designed by training providers and industry bodies, and on the ground the employers were kind of saying, I don't know if this is actually meeting our needs, you know, is this what we need? So what the government did is they put the control in the hands of employers. So all of the apprenticeship standards that are being delivered today have been designed by employers. Okay. So now there are three main kind of phases to an apprenticeship. So you have your practical period. Okay, that is your main body of the apprenticeship. When people think about an apprenticeship, they're thinking about the practical period. So that is your main duration, where you're doing all your training and your assessment, you're learning your functional skills. That is that bit. Okay, so that's the kind of year or so. Could be more. If you're on a 3-year apprenticeship, it could be 3 years in practical period. Okay, but after this, there's kind of a new thing that's coming. So now, at the end of an apprenticeship, we have a new way to check that people are competent and they're able to do that job and they're ready to enter the world of work in that space. Okay, so we have what's called endpoint assessment, and it's often abbreviated to EPA, which is why I've put that there, because you'll hear EPA spoken about a lot. Okay, endpoint assessment tends to be a pass or fail, or it can be a pass, merit or distinction, and that depends on the standard, and you will be told which your apprentice is working towards. Okay, so first thing that needs to happen before they reach endpoint assessment is they go through what's called gateway. You can see that that's the middle phase, and it's kind of like limbo stage. Okay, so you've done your practical period, and basically what happens is the employer, so yourself, the training provider, the people delivering the actual training, and the apprentice basically have a meeting where you all agree that the apprenticeship content has been achieved and the minimum duration has passed. and that's called a gateway meeting. Okay, so it's you all going, yes, we're happy to put them forward for the endpoint assessment. Okay, so this kind of middle ground where you have the meeting and say, yes, we've achieved the practical period, and you're waiting for the endpoint assessment to take place, is called gateway. Okay, then you'll have a date set for your endpoint assessment. Endpoint assessment, depending on the different apprenticeship standards and subjects, can look different. It can be that throughout their journey they've done a reflective journal and a portfolio, and they have to submit that for marking. It can be an exam, and it can be an interview with an industry professional where they're kind of asked different questions about their journey, about what they've learned, checking their competency. It can also be a mixture of the three. So it could be, for example, so I know for accountancy, for example, they put forward a portfolio of work, they sit exams during the practical period, and then at the end they have an interview. So they get the full triple whammy. Other ones may only just have one or two of the combination. Okay, but your training provider will talk you through exactly what that endpoint assessment is going to look like, prepare your apprentice to take part in that. But really, that's one of the key changes that you need to understand. And you have a lot of control over what these different stages of the apprenticeship look like. You're able to feed in now, because we were talking about apprenticeship standards being much more employer-led. Okay, so key thing one. Second thing, they brought in the apprenticeship levy. Out of interest, let's launch a quick poll. And this is me being a bit mean, to be honest, because I haven't explained what it is yet, but it's just to see what the kind of status of your knowledge is. Do you know if you're a levy or non-levy employer? Okay, so here we've got the question, I know my levy status, yes or no? Okay, I think the majority of businesses don't know, to be honest. It's a fairly new thing, and it can be quite confusing. So we're going to strip it back and explain it. Yeah, perfect. So 71 aren't sure about it. Cool. So again, you may need to press the cross to get rid of that. So let's talk levy, non-levy. What does it mean? What on earth am I talking about? And what is this jargon? Right, let's strip it right back. What does it mean? There's two types, levy, non-levy of employers. A levy employer has an annual payroll bill of over 3 million, okay, and that's in England only, so it's not global, England. If you have a payroll of over 3 million per year in England, you will pay, that should be 0.5% of your annual payroll. Sorry about that, not 50%, because that would be quite terrifying. You'll pay 0.5% of your annual payroll. I will amend that in a second. And you'll also receive a 15k allowance. So 0.5 of your payroll, you'll be essentially made to allocate to apprenticeship funds for you to spend, so it's your own money. The government will also give you then a 15k allowance as well. So instantly you've got 15k worth of apprenticeship money to spend on training. And then also the government will also top up your contribution with an extra 10%. Okay, so that's really large businesses. Chances are, if you're a large business and a levy payer, you know about it, because you will have had to do all sorts through HMRC when all the changes happened. So let's switch to small employers. Okay, majority of businesses in Cornwall are non-levy payers, as we call them. Okay, so essentially smaller businesses. So it means if you're non-levy, you have an annual payroll bill of under 3 million per year. Okay, annual per year, you know what I'm saying. You will pay a maximum of 5% of the training costs if you take on an apprentice. Okay, so whereas the levy is essentially like a tax, I suppose, on large employers, they have to pay some of their money towards their training. If you're a small business, actually what you're getting is the government is paying that for you. Okay, so the government, if you're a non-levy, so a small business of a payroll of under 3 million, if you take on an apprentice, you look at how much their training's worth. So we were talking about training values earlier and negotiating them. whatever you negotiate and agree with a training provider, the government's going to pay between 95 and 100% of that cost. Okay, so you're only having to pay maybe 5%. I hope that makes sense. And I'm sorry if I've confused anyone more with my 50% there. It's 0.5%. Okay. But if you're a levy payer, you probably know that already. Okay. Final thing, which we're going to cover in the reforms, is the Apprenticeship Service. Okay. So previously, all of the apprenticeship funding was managed by your training provider. We've talked about how employers have been able to design their own apprenticeships now. And with that comes an additional level of ownership. Okay, the government really want to see employers owning their apprenticeship duration and apprenticeship training. So what they did is they set up the Apprenticeship Service. It sits on a .gov website. Okay, so it's accessible through Google. You can just Google Apprenticeship Service and it will come up. And it basically enables you to oversee and manage the entirety of the apprenticeship journey, okay? Through from reserving your apprenticeship funds, allocating a training provider, applying for grants, all of this comes on the Apprenticeship Service. The first thing I want to say is don't panic about this. It's really easy to use, but also the added benefit is you can allocate for your training provider to have access to your apprenticeship service if you want them to, so they can help you. Okay, so don't be overwhelmed by this, but I'm just letting you know what's on here because it is kind of the hub, if you like, of your apprenticeship journey now. As I mentioned, you'll be able to access and manage all apprenticeship training money within this service. Okay, so you'll have an account, you'll be able to see the money being spent, coming in and out. You'll be able to advertise your apprenticeship. So if you're advertising for a new hire, then it's got an element on it called Find an Apprenticeship, and you can pop your vacancy on there, and then that basically holds all of the apprenticeship vacancies in England. You can choose an apprenticeship training course. So through this portal as well, you can have a look and browse all the different training aspects for apprenticeships, different sectors, industries, job roles. You can also look at different training providers. They have ratings and feedback on there. So you can have a look at kind of who's closest to me, who's the best to train in this area. So you can have a look at all the different options. We mentioned earlier about endpoint assessment. You can actually choose from different organisations to undertake this. So it may be that you have a preference of who you want to do that testing. You can select your endpoint assessment organisation through here. You can give feedback on your apprenticeship service, so, and your experience. So where I just said about, for example, the training providers have got kind of feedback and scores, you can feed into that through this service. And as I mentioned, all of these things, if they feel overwhelming, and it, to be honest with you, it's very simple and they've done it really well. But if it feels overwhelming, you can give your training provider access and they can help you. So they can go in and load the vacancy. They can go in and make sure that the apprenticeship funding is being drawn down properly. They can go in and make sure you've got an endpoint assessment chosen, etc. They can't obviously give feedback on themselves. So there are mitigations within the system for who can do what. We mentioned earlier about levy and non-levy businesses. So small non-levy businesses, you reserve, you know, we were talking about the government's going to give you between 95 and 100% of funding. You can reserve that funding from the government through this system. And also large employers. So if you're part of a supply chain and you may work with a levy business, if they have surplus training money in their account, they can actually transfer that to you. So you can then have the training for free, essentially. So that can happen through the system as well. If you are a levy business, if you're a large employer, this is where you add your PAYE schemes. You add your training providers that you want to use, and where I just said about if a levy payer has got surplus account, they've got too much training money potentially in their account for the amount of apprentices they want to put in post, you can transfer that to other small employers. So again, kind of two sides of the coin there, depending on which side you sit. Okay, so the apprenticeship service is a really key element, but don't be overwhelmed by it. They have laid it out really well. It's really easy to understand. and it gives you actually control and oversight of everything that's going on. It means you actually know what's going in, what's going out, who's on the record as on an apprenticeship, who's delivering your apprenticeship, and you're able to feedback on that experience. Okay, so it's really important, but there is kind of support there to help you as well, with the training providers being able to have access. So we've spoken a little bit there about kind of support and access, and we've covered the myths, we've covered the benefits, we've covered the basics, and a little bit about the reforms. So what support is available to you if you take on an apprentice? Let's have a look. Grants for businesses. That's what we all want to know about, isn't it? All employers. So all employers this applies to. There is a £1,000 incentive if you recruit a 16 to 18-year-old apprentice. Okay. It also applies, this is the little like caveat, if you employ somebody 19 to 24 into an apprenticeship and they've got an EHCP. What on earth does that mean, you're asking me? Educational healthcare plan. That comes from a school or a college. Okay, so mainstream education. But in general, tends to be 16 to 18-year-olds, unless they've got that additional need. Okay, so if you take on a 16 to 18-year-old apprentice, the government will give you £1,000 as an incentive for doing so. How is that paid? Right, so that is paid in 2 instalments of £500, so both equal. And the key word here is triggered. Okay, so £500 is triggered after the apprentice has been on for 90 days. £500 is triggered after they've been on for 365. Why am I making that really clear? It's because the money will not be in your account on day 90 and day 365. It has to go through a process. But that is the point where the funding agency gets notified that you're due a grant. Okay, it doesn't tend to be that long after, but it can be 4 to 6 weeks, depending on kind of where you are within the dates of a month. Your training provider can talk you through that and set expectations with you, but I just wanted to make that really clear. You will get the £1,000, but it's key to just be aware of the timelines of that, as always with receiving grants. So if you're a non-levy business and you have under 50 employees, if you take on a 16 to 18-year-old, they'll pay 100% of the training costs. So remember earlier, I kept saying between 95 and 100%, between 95 and 100%. You probably thought, well, which is it? If you're a non-levy business taking on a 16 to 18-year-old and you have less than 50 employees, the government will pay 100%. Otherwise, they're paying 95% and you're paying 5%. Okay, so in general, 95% of the costs are covered by the government, unless you take on a 16 to 18-year-old and you've got less than 50 employees. These are the basic grants that have stood the test of time. They've been in place for a few years now, but there are additional grants available at the moment, and you probably heard them spoken about in the Chancellor's budget. Okay, the important thing to note is the grants I'm about to speak about are in addition to these ones. So these always remain. Okay. So new grant incentives, COVID response. So when the Chancellor's budget was announced, there were already some COVID response grants in place for apprenticeship employers, but they have been enhanced quite significantly. So it's definitely the time to think about taking on an apprentice if you were considering it. Okay, what do they look like? So the new grants for the COVID response are for new hire only. Okay, so we spoke earlier about you can put somebody who's already in your business on an apprenticeship as long as they're kind of moving into a new role, gaining new skills, promotion, etc. But for this, the government are only applying this incentive if it's a new member of staff to your business. Okay, so your business will receive £3,000 for any new hire of any age who join your organisation from the 1st of April to the 30th of September. Okay, so between April and September, if you take on a new apprentice of any age, the government will give you £3,000 towards that. Okay. What's important to note, again, with funding and the flow of money is to be aware of what does this mean. You know, you're not going to get paid £3,000 on day one, unfortunately. So the split is the same as the previous, so it will be split equally, 1,500, 1,500, triggered at 90 days, triggered at 365. But what you just need to take into consideration is that they're opening applications for these incentives in June. So actually, if you were to take someone on in April, there might be a slight lag in you getting that first instalment, because you've got to be able to apply in June. So just to be aware of that, but you will get the funding, obviously. So £3,000 for an apprentice of any age who's new to your business. So that person is new on the books. Really key. So obviously, let's put 2 and 2 together here for a second. If I took on a 16 to 18-year-old in a small business with less than 50 employees, I'd get 100% of the training costs covered. I'd get £1,000 because they're 16 to 18, and I'd get £3,000 because they're new to my business. So that's £4,000 worth of grants split in 2 equal payments, and 100% of that training cost, all of that training that they're getting, free. So consider it. Now is the time to consider it. And also, it's important to note, why is there more money for 16 to 18? Let me just give you a bit of food for thought. Okay, there is a reason you get more money for taking on a younger apprentice. It is because you will have to put additional support in place. Okay, if you have somebody 16 to 18 on an apprenticeship in your workplace, you need to make sure that they are safe, they have a mentor, and you have appropriate kind of mechanisms in place to make sure they don't come to harm. Additionally, they are going to come with less work experience. Okay, so you're going to need to invest more time in them. That's why you get the additional £1,000. So while it sounds great on paper to be from 16 to 18, and it absolutely is if you get the right person, what I would also say is don't discard older apprentices. Okay, don't discard older applicants, because they may be, depending on what you're looking for, more suitable. So if you're looking for somebody that has got more experience in the workplace or comes with a certain set of skills, you're still getting £3,000. Okay, so really thinking about what do we want as a business. You know, do we want someone young who we can mold and bring up through the ranks, or do we want someone who can maybe hit the ground running a little bit more? So yeah, that's a huge amount of money at the moment available, and that is per apprentice. So should you be taking on more than one, that's just duplicating. Okay, so there's your financial support. That's what we were all waiting for, wasn't it? Just quickly on the Kickstart scheme. You've probably heard a little bit about this, and actually it serves and can serve as a precursor to apprenticeships. So it's a great way to bring somebody in who's new to the business and kind of almost see how they fit and give them experience of your work and see if they enjoy it. So this Kickstart scheme is providing funding to employers to create job placements, okay, for 16 to 24-year-olds who are currently on universal credit. Okay, so what does that mean? So new job vacancies to your business, they can be in post for 25 hours per week minimum, so it can be more, and it tends to be for up to 6 months. You will have to pay at least the national minimum wage, national living wage, depending on their age, but you actually get that reimbursed by the government, and they also pay the national insurance contributions. They require any basic training, and you're basically supporting that individual to gain long-term work. So it's a great way if you want to bring a new young person to your business for an apprenticeship to kind of say, okay, we're going to take them on for X amount of time to learn kind of basic skills and get them job ready while the government's paying their wage. And then you can then go on and maybe employ them as an apprentice or a member of staff if it does work out. There is also grants to participate in this scheme. I think it's up to £1,500. So it's worth having a look at if you're looking at new hire, definitely, and unsure where to, you want to kind of see if somebody fits first. Back to apprenticeships. Apprenticeships, as we said earlier, a real job, learning and experience gained in the workplace, and the individual is being paid. So what are employer experiences of apprenticeships? Let's have a look. 86% of employers said apprenticeships help them develop skills relevant to their organisation. 78% is seen an increase in improvement in productivity, and 74% saw them improve the quality of their product or service. So alongside this, it's key to note you can adapt their training and what's included in the content to the needs of your business throughout the journey. Obviously, we spoke about them being motivated to gain new skills, so you can even kind of add additional modules in if you want to. And just a great way to expand and upskill your workforce, basically. So just finally, a couple of quotes here. So this one from JL Flat Roofing. They've been in the press recently, locally, for their kind of investment in training. And here you can see, they're considering apprenticeships. They see them as a great investment for their business. St Austell Brewery. So they're saying, people are at heart of their business. And this is a way for them to find enthusiastic and committed individuals. And again, we were talking earlier about potentially having issues finding the right skills in people to bring into your workforce. So they're saying it's a great way to kind of offer a long-term solution to that. So just to bring us to a close, I have ran over massively because I was supposed to leave some time for questions. We will do questions at the end. So firstly, just if you're unsure where to start, it was a huge amount of information that I've given you today. If you are unsure where to start, please do come to us at the Skills Hub. Come and speak to us, come and speak to a member of our team. We've got amazing what are called skills connectors who will speak to you and find out if an apprenticeship's right for your business. They can help you choose the right apprenticeship standard for the training. They can help you find a training provider that meets your needs, and also advise you about all of those grant options available. Aside from us, there is other support available within Cornwall, obviously. So you have the Cornwall Apprenticeships website. So that is run by Skills Hub. It's an outreach programme where basically there's a brilliant website having all of the information to do with apprenticeships, FAQs, and also from an individual's point of view, any questions they may have on this website. There are apprenticeship training agencies as well. They can help you with recruitment of apprentices. So that's a really key one. Training providers, there's a huge amount of training providers in the county offering apprenticeships, and they can help you with any queries. And also the .gov website is a brilliant resource. There's so much information on there. It's fab. So please do check that out. So that brings me to the end. That was very much a whistle-stop tour. Thank you for sticking with me during that time. And we will now flick back and see if you have any questions. Okay, so please feel free to get in contact with us if you would like to discuss things in more detail. Always happy to be there on the end of the phone or on Teams to support you, especially while we're in this kind of weird distanced world. Maybe one day we might even get to have a cup of coffee face to face. But please do get in contact with us. I'm going to flash this down just so that I can kind of talk to you one-to-one.
We have a few questions that have come through, Bethany. I might go through these in order of when they did come through via the chat. The first of these is there a maximum number of apprentices a small business can have running at one time? And a second part of that question is, what is the definition of a small business?
Cool. So definition of a small business, as we saw earlier, is if you've got a payroll of less than 3 million, okay? That makes you what's called a non-levy employer. And then a small business within that is where you get that additional incentive if you've got less than 50 employees and you're taking on a 16 to 18. That's the only difference at that point, but otherwise payroll less 3 million. There is no maximum amount of apprentices you can have as a small business. However, we have got a slight issue with the Apprenticeship Service at the moment, historically, in that it would only allow you to reserve funds for a certain amount of apprentices. The government are working on that. They've actually released it. So I think there's now 6 you can reserve. Thank you, and thank you, JC, for sticking with us. No problem at all. So yeah, you can only reserve funding for 6 at a time at the moment, but the government's looking to release that. So it's kind of one of those anomalies in the system which they're working on, but there isn't technically a maximum.
Okay, additional question. We have taken on a new hire with the intention of them being an apprentice, but the apprenticeships were being changed, sorry. So we couldn't wait for them to start. They started in March, but the apprenticeship will start in September. Will we still be able to claim the £3,000 for this person?
So I think, so prior to April, so because this person was enrolled in March there was also apprenticeship grants available through the COVID scheme, but they were slightly less. So they were 1,500 and 2,000, I think, depending on the age. So what it's worth doing is speaking to your training provider, explaining you would like to access the new hire grant and looking at that, because I think you'll still be entitled to a grant, but it might be less than 3k, because prior to 1st of April, they were slightly lower. It was announced in the Chancellor's budget that they were being increased. So yes, it would depend on their age and when they were kind of brought into the business. So pre-April, it's going to be slightly lower grant amount, and it will be dependent on their age. Speak to your training provider, or feel free to put me an email and I'll look at it properly for you once I have a few more details. But I think you should be entitled to something.
And just additional, whilst talking about the incentives, there's an additional question here. Is that £3,000 per apprentice as part of that new funding stream?
Yes, it is indeed.
One more, sorry. Are there any differences in funding for if you are a charity?
No. So for apprenticeships, they don't differentiate between different kind of sectors, if you like, charitable or otherwise. So it would still just be based on your annual payroll and then the size of the business if you're taking on a young person.
Okay, that's it as far as the questions go. So if anybody has anything else, please speak now or forever hold your peace.
Well, thank you everyone for sticking with me. I know it was a huge amount of information, and the world of apprenticeships can be overwhelming. That's why we're here to help and help guide you through it and make it as easy as possible for you. So if you do think, oh my gosh, like I don't know where to start, please just drop us a line. We're more than happy to help, and we'll just talk you through the basics, and one step at a time is always the best way to do these things. But they are so worthwhile. There's some really great stories out there if you have a look at different apprenticeship experiences. I know, for example, one apprentice that joined a business as business admin at level 2. They're now in the management team 5 years later, and within the first 3 years of their apprenticeship, they'd increased website sales by over 50% for the business. I mean, they really are worthwhile considering, so do have a look at them. Nick's just popping in the chat there our contact details, so please do kind of come through and have a chat. It'd be great.
All right, thank you, Bethany. Thank you, everybody, for coming along.
Thank you. I'm sorry we were scraping through at the end, but we got there. I'll be better with my timing next time.